Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this interview. I've got with me the phenomenon that is Nigel Hitchcock. Nigel Hitchcock began playing the alto sax at the age of 8. And in 1982, he and his brother joined the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. He's since then, at the age of 16, he moved to London and began a career as a session musician and recorded TV jingles, movie soundtracks, and pop solos. And as I'm looking at the biog now, since then his career has exploded, and he's one of the top names in the industry. He's one of the go-to session players. There's a long list of artists that he's performed with: Tom Jones, Wet Wet Wet, Beverley Craven, Ray Charles, Robbie Williams, Mark Knopfler, and a whole load of others. So I'm delighted to have Nigel with us today to talk about the topic of sight reading. So Nigel, welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Great to see you here. Now, the reason that that I asked you in this interview to speak to me was because I asked in the Peak Performance for Musicians Facebook group, who stands out in your mind as a great sight reader, and a few people had heard of your legendary abilities as a sight reader, and I think was it Brandon Allen, I think, described you as like an alien, his amazing abilities. So we found ourselves on this conversation to talk about the topic, because I know there's a lot of people that would be really interested to know not only how that skill that you have has developed, but also what it's like and how maybe you think about it. Because I know I speak to lots of people who are good players. They can get round, say, I'm a sax player too, they can get round their horn, they've got chops and stuff, but when it comes to the whole issue of reading and getting ready to be able to do some of the I guess like sort of high profile highly paid session work that people kind of think that they've got somewhere to get to still with their sight reading, and would love to hear what your what it's like for you. So how did you get to? I mean, I'm kind of bigging up your sight reading, and you said you blushed. But what's it? How could you talk a bit about like how you've got here with? In terms of sight reading, in terms of reading. Yeah.
Well, as you just said, I started playing at a very early age. I was only 8 when I started playing the saxophone, to follow in the footsteps of my older brother. And fortunately, I had a fantastic saxophone teacher who was been a professional musician himself and ran a big band in my local area. And he had a saxophone tutor book, which I've been trying to find actually for many years now, and I've never managed to locate one. So if anybody finds one, let me know. It's called the EB Saxophone Tutor, EBBE. And when I went for saxophone lessons, every lesson I would play through this book, and then we'd leave a marker in it, and when I came back the next time, we'd carry on playing through this book. And it took me 2.5 years in total to get from the beginning to the last page of this book. And the way that my saxophone teacher taught me was that when you're playing something, you should be reading ahead. Always, you should be reading ahead. So if you're playing bar 1, you should have already looked at bar 1 and learnt it and be looking at bar 2. That was the very first step. Even when playing something very, very simple, just to look ahead a little bit. Just try and be looking at the bar in front while you play the previous bar. And then in the next lesson, as the music got more difficult, he'd say, now look 2 bars ahead, and be reading 2 bars ahead. And eventually this went on and on and on, until finally, by the time I was getting towards the back end of the book, I could, and actually I have to say that this skill has slipped a little, because it's something that doesn't really get used quite as much as I learnt the ability to have it. But I did eventually, I managed to get to a point where I could read music almost 16 bars ahead of what I was actually playing. So if at any moment I closed my eyes, I could still play the next 16 bars, because it's all there. I've read it and I've scanned it. And I guess the only way I can equate it is that if you had a paragraph of dialogue to read, maybe some Shakespeare or something, maybe you would look at the whole thing and you could put the paper down and you could still finish the sentence to your audience without having to look back at the page, you know? It's quite a natural thing for us to do when we're reading our own language, but it doesn't always tie up with people's brains when they're trying to do it with music. I think I was very lucky to start it very early on and with a very astute man who understood the process of how to teach people to learn, not how to just take stuff in parrot fashion, but how to actually teach myself to get better. That was the best thing he ever did for me. So yeah, that's how it all started, really. Now, I sometimes have to remind myself if I'm playing something really hard and I get a bit flustered and I think, hang on, I shouldn't be looking at the thing I'm trying to play right now. I should have looked at that a few seconds ago. I should have already analysed that, worked it out in my mind, sorted out whether I needed some weird fingerings and all that kind of stuff, and be looking at the next bit when I'm playing that. So that's how it should work anyway. Yeah. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. So is it something that is a skill that's kind of been topped up as you've gone along, or is it something that you've specifically worked at as part of your routine over the years?
I think it's something that once I realised that it was important and it was something I was going to have to do if I was going to be in the music business. And also I have to say, you know, I'm completely addicted to music. I couldn't put my saxophone down when I was a kid, and I just wanted stuff to play all the time. It was a toy to me. So, for instance, when I first joined the big band, I took the second alto pad home with me and I practiced that sight reading with everything. I read the whole pad, music I'd never seen before. And then my saxophone teacher said, well, you've seen all that. So he gave me the tenor saxophone pad. And just go home and read that. See how you get on with that. And then he gave me the lead alto pad, you know. And then I would find music. I would be classical music in the house and all sorts of things. Just read as much as you possibly can, you know. And it becomes like when you're reading a sentence, when you're reading the lazy dog jumped over the fox or something. There was some fantastic English sentence that we all learned when we were at school. But when you see these words, you're not going you don't go THE, oh, that's the, you know, your brain doesn't do that process anymore. You just look at it and you go, the. It's recognition. You recognize what that looks like. So now, if I'm on a session and I see, ba-da-da-da-da, it's a phrase that we've all played a million times. I recognize it like my own name, you know? I recognize these things. It's purely recognition. I'm not actually reading anything, if you know what I mean. I'm actually just remembering and recognizing these phrases that I've seen hundreds of times before. And you can put any big band arrangement, any chart, like a Glenn Miller, a Benny Goodman, any kind of songs, any Frank Sinatra stuff, all of those stuff, they all contain very similar phrases. For instance, that one, 1, 2, 3, 4, da do da da. So when I see that, I'm not working out, oh my God, what is that? Oh, there's a quiver rest, and then no, I just see it and say it like you do with words. So it's as much about recognition as anything. And actually, I recently proved that to myself as a point of example. I've been doing a little bit of work with the NDR radio band in Hamburg, who are an incredible band, and they're all fantastic readers, and they really can sight read anything. And we were playing some Indian music, which for a start it's all in 13/8, and then they have groupings where you're playing groups of 4 notes over 3 quavers. So there's some things that look incredibly difficult, and at first I looked at it and I got no idea what that is. And then as soon as I'd actually worked out what it was, you go, it's just that. And it's almost like it's just you're reading exactly the same words but in somebody else's handwriting, really. You know, it's it's reminding yourself that actually you do recognize this stuff and you know exactly how it goes, but you just have to break it down into smaller units, you know. And then, yeah, it's about the ability to be able to be playing one thing whilst already analysing what's in front of you, so that when you get there, you don't stop and give yourself time to analyse it. You already know what it is. You know? So there you go. I hope that's that brings something to your viewers, as it were.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure it does, because I think that definitely resonates with my experiences with students that I've had and people that I've sort of spoken to about, particularly what you're saying about reading in larger chunks. And obviously, if you're trying to work out every single rhythm in those larger chunks, then you can't think in those large chunks. So
exactly, yes,
yeah.
And of course, not all music is incredibly difficult. It'll be something something a bit of a rest, something and then something incredibly difficult that you've never seen before. So the more that you know all the little simple things. I mean, now if I see a 3-page piece of music, I open it up and my eyes scan across it all, and they go straight to the difficult bit that I've never seen before, and I play it once in my head and I go, okay, I know it now. And then I'm not sight reading it anymore. And when everybody else gets there and they all crumble and stumble, I'm just playing it again. The other thing I must tell you as well is that I was always taught, when you open a piece of music, the very first thing you do before you play or look at any of the notes is to find all the signs. If there is a dal segno, if there's a DS al coda, you look and you scan, you see on page 3 that there's a DS, and that actually you've got to go back to letter A, which is on page 1. And then you'll read to halfway through page 2 and take the coda, which takes you to the end of page 3 again. And that, we call that the choreography. This kind of shorthand term for that. It's just knowing in advance, like a long time in advance, before you start the piece of music. When you get to that point, your eyes are going to jump right back to this other page, play this bit again, and then jump to the end. And so many people are just not prepared for that at all, because they don't look. They don't look at that music. They're reading it as if it's just cool. They're just going to look at this for the first time, and they're suddenly going to be able to do. No, nobody's capable of suddenly being able to do that. But we are all capable of having a good look at it first before you start playing. And I was taught to do that, and I was reprimanded if I didn't from a very early age. So it became first nature. That's what I always did. And that has always stood me in very good stead. I can pretty much read anything, and I don't get caught out by those things, Even to the point, actually, that I managed to surprise a couple of people at the NDR the other day, because we had a piece of music that was 8 pages long. And there is a way to fold the music in order that when you get to the end and you have to take the coda back to page 1, that you can just flip it over and page 1 is right there. And then when you turn it this way, you're already at the coda at the end. And I was the only one that did that. And the other guys were looking at me like, how did you do that? And it's like, well, it's simple. I looked at it before we started playing, and I thought, okay, I've got to get from there to there. And I folded all the pieces of paper the right way around. It's only common sense. There's no magic involved. But if you don't do it, you're going to be the guy on the gig that's fumbling and throwing bits of music all over the place, And I never want to be that guy. So.
Yeah. So it's what I'm hearing you say, which is fabulous, is that I suppose it sounds like you're drawing a really clear distinction between the stuff you can prep and the stuff you can't prep, and the stuff you can prep, do it. Make sure
Exactly.
you're all over it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then it means that actually, out of those 8 pages, there were a couple of things that were incredibly difficult that I probably didn't recognise as much as I recognised the other patterns of music and phrases and stuff. And throughout the time, I kept glancing at them and kept looking at them. So hopefully by the time I'd got there, I'd seen them a couple of times and I was a bit more prepared. I'm not saying that I was absolutely perfect, and I mean, I'm pretty good. I'm like 99.5% on it. But there are some things that do still, that trip us up. And as I say, if you don't do that all the time, those skills sort of evaporate. They leave you, And throughout my career, I've had like maybe years at a time where I haven't even looked at a piece of music, and then suddenly I've been back in the studio looking at something incredibly difficult, and then you panic. You think, oh my God, it's just like hieroglyphics again. You have to remind yourself about this music thing and how it works, and refamiliarize yourself with the patterns that you're seeing there of these phrases, And just trying to break it down into smaller chunks, not looking at this whole thing, A few years ago, I recorded a classical saxophone concerto. Again, this was like a 25-minute concerto, and you take a wad of music like that, and it was everything about it was so incredibly hard that on first sight you could just go, "Oh my God," and just give up, just throw it away. You just need to break it down bit by bit. You go, okay, right, what does this bar do? What does that mean? And then familiarize yourself. And it's just about going over and over and over it. I am very lucky in as much as I do have an ability that if I've played a piece of music, I can remember it straight away. I don't try to do these things anymore, but when I was young, it was always a challenge. I could play a 3-piece piece of music, and then the next time I could just play it without the music. But it's more about, I don't have a perfect photographic memory because this was looked into at one point. But what I do have is this ability to scan ahead and play the music already once in my head before I play it. And that somehow makes it stick much better than it does if you're just reading at the time that you're playing something. I don't remember anything if I'm reading at the time I'm playing it. But when I'm reading ahead, by the end of it, I've kind of learnt it. So it accesses a slightly different part of your brain, I think, by doing that, by looking ahead from the thing that you're doing now. It's like existing in 2 different timelines or something at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah. So when you're doing that, is that kind of like are you kind of hearing it through in your head beforehand, or is it a very visual thing? You're kind of like seeing the rhythms and like it's like kind of a picture.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not enough for me to just see it. I'll talk about many years ago. I used to play with a saxophone quartet called Itchy Fingers, and the very first gig, it was unbelievable, and the music was it was diabolical, as we say. I mean, it was just really, really hard stuff. So, and I was depping for one of the guys had broken his fingers, and I had to come in at the last minute and just jump in and dep for them. So, on the first gig, I'm standing there with 2 music stands with like 8-page charts across it, semi-quavers all over the place. And the other 3 guys have learnt all their stuff, and they're all jumping up and down all around the audience, and they've got clip-on microphones. And I thought, I can't do this again tomorrow night. I feel like an idiot, So that night, I took all the music, and because I'd played it through, I knew what it sounded like. And if as long as I know what it sounds like, it'll stay in the memory much more. I mean, I can pitch music as I read it and hear it that way, but of course to hear it in context with the other guys is much more important. But I managed to take all of that music away, and the next night I did the gig without any music, and absolutely, totally freaked everybody out.
Wow. Wow.
But I can't just take a snapshot of it. It's not. As I say, I don't have a perfect photographic memory. I still need to actually play through the music and scan through it. But when I was on the gig, I am reading a picture of what I'm looking at. And so I was on the train a couple of days later with the guy that had written all the music, Mike Mower, and he said to me, "So this tune, Hiatus, page 8, 5th line down, 4th bar in, 7th semi-quaver, what note is it?" And I said, "It's just after the crossing out." And it was an F sharp, but you changed it to a G. He couldn't get his mind right. But I remember what it looked like. I'm still reading it. So I don't know, am I really remembering it? No, I'm just reading it again. But I remembered what it looked like in connection with how I remember it sounded. The 2 things have to be married,
Yeah.
Yes, I'm very lucky to have those abilities. But again, it's, as I say, it's not a perfect photographic memory, and it is more tied in with my earlier ability to be able to look ahead and to scan the music and to absorb it. And,
it really sounds like you're reading it in large chunks. The large chunk thing seems to be a really important thing to how you.
Yes,
that's what it sounds like to me, anyway.
My
novice point of view.
When you've got something that's really long, and then you just have to condense it down into smaller chunks, but still lump sized. Yeah. the only thing that I will say about this is that so many people don't approach the topic of reading until they're much older. And I'll say it must be the same as, you know, if you're a 35-year-old person and you don't know how to read English, how quickly are you going to be able to read a book? You know, you're not going to be reading Shakespeare in 2 weeks. And yet some people expect that of themselves. It's like, no. You've got to do cat, dog, owl, fox for some time before you start speaking Shakespeare. And lots of people just want to jump straight in. You just can't. You can't. You have to do, this is a process that you really must start from the beginning. You know, I'm not saying that it's impossible if you're older. I'm just saying that you must understand that there are some limitations to starting this in your older years. You know.
Have you come across people that have done that? Sorry, have you come across people that have done that at an older age? Because I know there's a lot of players that are really good, you know, sort of technically, but maybe have come to reading later and have still made quite a success of things. I wonder if there's anyone that sort of stands out for you.
Yeah, there are some guys that certainly have started off as jazz and pop musicians and didn't really look into the reading thing, and then all of a sudden they find themselves on a maybe they get on a TV show because they're really funky guys and they look great and all that kind of thing. And then it turns out actually they've got to play 25 pieces of music in different keys from the originals and also not the same format as the original songs. And then the singer says, actually, I'm going to take out that second chorus. And you can't remember all of these things for a television show unless you start writing stuff down. Until you start actually, and some of these people find themselves actually, I need to just write myself a part. And some of them actually, I've seen a couple of guys that have come into that world and just started jotting notes for themselves and eventually starting to realise that actually the quickest way to do this is just to write notes. Oh, how can I do it? Oh, I know, I've just put them on a stave. And they find themselves going back to the thing that they had, a lot of them on purpose didn't want to read. Actually, just for a second, I'd like to talk about this. This is something that crops up an awful lot. Is there are a lot of people out there that have decided at an early age that they don't want to read music because they don't want to be that kind of musician. That they want to be a rock and roll musician or they want to be a jazz musician. I don't want to read stuff. I want it to be coming from my heart, you know. And it's like, well, you know, you've missed the point. When I play, every note I play comes from my heart. But I can still let somebody else tell me what they need to play for the other hour and a half of the gig before I get to express myself because I can read this notation. The best readers are the ones that just look at it and play it instantly like they've just created it. And there's not so many people that can do it at that level, really. But it's completely possible. And yeah, you know, I still get asked to do lots of pop solos and funk solos. They don't get the people that can't read. They still want somebody that can actually, you know, take part in the conversation about the format of the song and things like that, you know. Drummers are always a fine example because so many drummers think, oh, I don't need to read. I'm just going to be a groovy guy, you know. Like, well, you may be a groovy guy, but you're not going to go into a studio and you're not going to be on a TV session or anything like that because it's not reliable. I want a guy that knows exactly how to read. And if I want it to end with a tss and not a blop, I want you to mark that on your part and never, ever play it wrong again, you know. And in London, I mean, there's probably like 4 or 5 drummers that are just incredible at that. And they're the grooviest guys in the world, you know. They play like the uber drummers. It doesn't make them play more parrot fashion or more stilted because they can read music. In fact, quite the opposite. They seem to be more loose and open and, you know, beautifully groovy because they're so familiar with the music. Of course, if you're sitting there looking at the part like this, it's going to make you a bit on edge and you're not going to play. But eventually you get to a point where the music is just a guideline. You know, you're looking at it in the same way that you look at the road as you're driving down a motorway. You're not looking at every post and everything and go, oh no, there's a blade of grass. Oh no, there's a, you know, you've just got your eyes there and you're having a conversation with somebody and you're driving your car at 100 miles an hour, you know. And that's what playing music is like, reading music when you can do it, you know.
Something, yeah, it's fantastic. It's really excellent to get this much of an insight into what it's, how you think about it. And something that popped up for me when you were talking about all that stuff was that it sounds like there's not really a sort of a personal association with the reading process. It's like, because I know there's lots of people that kind of, they take it very personally. And you mentioned earlier about the times when you see a bit and you panic a bit, and I heard that and thought it's quite reassuring to think that everybody feels that kind of thing from time to time. But then clearly sounds to me like, it's just like, okay, well, I've just felt that and time to move on. Doesn't mean it's not the feedback on how good a musician I am, or what kind of road I'm driving on, all that kind of stuff. It's just one of the things that's just going by,
Yes, yeah. Also, of course, everybody has those moments where you see something and your heart flutters and you go, I can't play that, and then you try and play it and you either come out the other end and go, oh God, I really, I didn't do that very well. And you tell yourself off and go, right, I'm going to have a look at that and make sure that I don't play that so badly. Or, I was very lucky that I've had many times of complete elation from the fact that I managed to spot that just in enough time to look at it for a couple of seconds before I got there. And then when I got there, I just sailed through it as if I was saying, hello, my name's Nigel Hitchcock. I was born on the 4th of January. Yeah, no problem. Something I've said a billion times and I know exactly how it goes, not like I'm trying to speak Klingon to a French person or something like really out of the ordinary is going on here. No, it's not. It's just another version of something that you already know. It's music. It's all just music, Of course, I think, obviously it takes many years to be able to sort of see the notes on the page and go, okay, well, the notes say this thing, the notes are telling me to do this arrangement of playing. But actually what that really means is this sound and this feeling, and these notes want to be played a little bit more like this. And, knowing actually what the character of the notes is just purely from experience takes a long time, but I had that time. I started playing when I was 8. I turned pro before I was 16. I've seen a lot of music over the years, and when I put some, I've been around the block. Yeah, exactly. And so pretty much whatever you put in front of me in any style, in any version of music, I know what it means in that genre as well. And also you could see the same thing, but in different styles of music, they mean slightly different things. If you're in a big band and you see one crotchet on the second beat of the bar, you just kind of go, it's just but if you're in a horn section and there's a funk or a pop song going behind you, it's the way that you play that note is like, ow! It's hard and attacking, and it has a different meaning because you're in a different genre of music. If you're in classical music, it's pa. But it's all just written as one note on the second beat of the bar. So knowing all those things and knowing how to interpret what you're seeing is purely from experience. And you can only do that by being in the music world and, soaking it all up.
Yeah, awesome. So if someone, say, is has started learning to read and has kind of got some degree, I'm not talking total beginner as an adult, but some facility, but it's like the kind of thing that they don't really want to admit they've got to work on. They suddenly heard you talking on this video and they go, okay, I've really got to do something about this. If they've got, say, 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day, what would be your recommendation that they do, or what would be something that, as an adult, a late comer to sort of really nailing your reading? What would you recommend?
It doesn't have to be, you don't have to look at the hardest music. Just take pieces of music you've never seen before and to just try and find things that you've never seen, and just play through them. Just count yourself in and go and see how far you get. Another big mistake as well, actually. You're reminding me of all these little things that I was taught when I was 8 years old. That's nearly 40 years ago, by the way. All these things I started. Was that in my first lesson, I made a mistake and I stopped. And my saxophone teacher said, "You will never, ever do that. Ever again. This is music. You can't stop. Everyone else is still going." You know? And there's something about that. Now, people that, when they're trying to learn to read, when they make a mistake, they stop and look at it, never seem to get better. Half or a lot of the big thing about being good at reading is staying in the flow of the music. You know, so if it's going like this, you know, and there's a band going, and you go, and it's all going rather well, and then you get a phrase that goes, and you, oh my God, you know, you don't stop, you just keep going, and I'm in the next bar now, and I'm following that through. You know, you don't stop and look back at your mistakes. When you finish the piece of music, you go back and you look at that phrase, and you make sure that you never mess that phrase up again. You could get it under your fingers and work it through, but it's about staying in the flow, and that's very, very important. You must always stay in time. Don't ever stop for your own mistakes. Look at them afterwards. Remember where they happen and look at them afterwards. But so I'd say, yes, just take a piece of music that you've never seen before, count yourself in, try and make your way through it, and do as much of that as you possibly can. As I say, I was so lucky to have had a big band saxophone player who had all these music pads that I could just take away. And after 3 years, I then went to the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, where I had all the National Youth Jazz Orchestra saxophone pads, which all had like 300 pieces of music in them. And one by one, I brought them all home, and I sat and I just read through them. It didn't matter about the mistakes, just read through them. And that was what I did. In my lifetime, I must have seen 10,000 pieces of music. And that's just, it's the same. If you read books, you tend to read quicker. You know, if you don't read very often, you find yourself almost reading out loud every word as a separate thing.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? If you're reading a book and there's a word that you don't know, you wouldn't go back and like. I mean, some people. I mean, I sometimes do this, like go to a dictionary and look up a word. But if you want to read and keep in the flow of the book you're reading as well, you want to keep.
That's right.
You don't want to, so you kind of get a sense for what that word is, and if it comes up all the time, it's like it's worth checking out.
That's right. And also, by the time, if you don't know what that word is, if you just carry on with the flow, by the time you get to the end of the sentence, you kind of know what that word meant anyway, because it's in the context of the sentence. And it's exactly the same with that really hard, silly phrase in the middle of bar 200 that goes, and you go, what does that mean? But actually, if it's all, hey, yeah, we're just going along like this, and it's, okay, now I kind of understand how that fits in. You know, it makes more sense in the flow. You can't just sit and repeatedly look at one bar over and over and expect it to make more sense. It gets that thing, if you repeat a word over and over, and you just go rhubarb, 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 eventually it has no meaning at all. And people do that as well. You see them sitting there and they go, oh no, that doesn't mean anything. You know, let's count it in, let's play it in the tune. You know, it has to be in context. Otherwise, you're sending yourself further away from the truth. If you just keep playing a silly phrase on its own, it means nothing, and it won't help you when you get there next time, because it won't feel the same. It doesn't feel the same out of context as it does in context. And you must learn to play it in context. When you get there with everybody else at the same time, that's when I want you to play it, right? Not on your own in your bedroom.
Yeah, it sounds really, also what's springing to mind is also how important it is, well, maybe not just important, but also relevant to be reading music with other people, because it kind of forces you to keep going, but also you're having to use those skills of listening to other people and fitting in and picking up those stylistic things on the hoof. Because I know, I mean, sort of young students that I've had they've practiced their reading, but have not really been reading. It's been practicing getting it under their fingers, and then they're not really sight reading. They're kind of
exactly
going through stuff. Whereas what you're saying is thousands of pieces of music. First time, whatever happens, keep going. When you're surrounded by people, then keep going and keep reading the same way.
Exactly.
Same way that you know, a lot with a book, you start at the beginning and go through. You don't regurgitate stuff, right, a million times.
No, exactly. Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's really helpful. I'm sure people will get a great deal out of this, Nigel. So thank you so much.
No, not at all. My pleasure.
I think I've got one more question. I'll tell you what, actually. So someone asked about what pieces. This is a sax player asked what pieces you'd recommend to work through. I mean, it sounds like you're thinking anything. Just read whatever's right for you at the right level.
Absolutely, yeah. The very first thing, so to be completely honest, when I was 6 years old, my sister came to me, and I have a brother and two older sisters. And she gave me a recorder and she said, you have to learn this instrument. You are going to be the second discant in the Hitchcock recorder quartet. And she gave me this recorder. And after about 2 weeks, I got A and B and G. But I was a bit dyslexic and I kept getting them mixed up. And eventually she threw the recorder at me. She said, you'll never be one of us. You'll never be a Hitchcock. You won't make it into the Hitchcock family recorder quartet. And I was so furious and so determined, and I took it away and I practiced and I practiced and I practiced. And all of a sudden, after about a month, the penny dropped and that was it. I could play. I don't know what happened, but there is something about pure application. If you keep doing something and just keep getting it wrong and keep getting it wrong and keep having people tell you you'll never be able to do it, keep doing it, it almost sends a message to the universe, right, I want to do this and I want to do it better than anybody else. And eventually the universe gives in and lets you have that skill. I know this. I've heard this story from hundreds of musicians that started off and they couldn't do anything. They were completely useless, and then all of a sudden one day, because they were so determined, the penny dropped and the information fell into them. So when I was 6, I'd got that, and the first thing I was doing was to play my sister's violin studies. So I was playing classical violin studies with the very first pieces of music I ever saw. There were bits of Chopin and piano music around the house. Then there was big band stuff. And yeah, I would say if you play in a big band, get all the saxophone pads. Just read through them all from beginning to end. Don't stop. Don't go back and look at anything. Just play them. Take them back. That'll do you so much good. If you don't have those, if you're a solo saxophone player, maybe try and find some pieces. Obviously, solo transcriptions are always a good thing to look at. And of course, this EB's saxophone tutor, as I say, was the most incredible thing, because on page 1 was the F and G march. The da 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 da. And then on the last page was something in 8 sharps or whatever it is. Just the most. With double sharps and triplets and semiquavers and demi-semiquavers all split up, and like one bar lasted a whole line for some of it. It was the most incredibly difficult piece of music you've ever seen. And the book gradually went in little baby steps from one place to the other. And as I say, it took me 2 years, basically 2.5 years, to get from page 1 to page, whatever it was, 200. And I would recommend that book to absolutely anyone. That will teach you everything you need to know about reading and playing, really,
Awesome.
Talking of transcriptions.
Speaking of transcriptions, awesome.
Here we go. I don't know where you can get these. I believe they're on the Jamie Aebersold catalogue. So you might want to have a look there. But these transcriptions were done by Edward Barker, who... First of all, he came to me and asked for saxophone lessons, and at that point I didn't really teach. And I said, well, okay, if you like. And then when he came for a lesson, he arrived with transcriptions of all my solos. And I thought, oh dear, he's going to teach me. And sure enough, he has. I've learned more about my own playing through him than I thought possible. There's a good selection in here. There's a couple of pop solos from the more commercial things I've done. And then towards the back, there's a few more kind of nastier jazz things to look at that might kind of catch you out and give you something to concentrate on. I have to say, even I find it hard to read my own solos. How about that? But I can.
Got no one to blame but yourself, Nigel. Then.
No one to blame. But even that, because it came out of me, I wasn't reading it the first time.
Yeah,
I played it.
sure.
Now I'm trying to read what I played 10 years ago in one particular event. It's like, wow, really? Did I really play that? But that was good practice. Actually, yeah, just trying to play along with these was good. But all transcription books, whoever it be, whoever your favourite players are, go and get them. Read through as many things as you possibly can, and just become accustomed to all the shapes and the signs. And if you really want to read, you will. That's all I'll say. Brilliant. If you really have that force behind you that you need or want to do it, it'll happen.
Inspirational words. Thank you so much. This is fabulous. if people wanted to get in touch with you or find out more about the great back catalogue of stuff that you've done, I mean, you've got a website, have you?
I have had a website for the last 30-something years. And actually, unfortunately, it became more hassle keeping it updated and not corrupted than anything else. So actually, if you want to get hold of me, Hitchcake. Yes, like cake that you eat. HITCHEAKE. Hitchcake @gmail.com. Please, if anybody got anything they want to write to me, they're more than welcome. And if I can help, I will. If not, you'll find me on Facebook and the usual media outlets.
Superb. Well, you're a gentleman for speaking to me in such depth about this, and thanks so much. I think there'll be so much in there for people.
I do hope so.
Yeah, I know so. Thanks, mate. Awesome.
Pleasure.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Great speaking to you. Awesome.
Cheers.